Hello, welcome back. It is week 172 on Out on the Line podcast. I'm Jeff with my co-host Alex. As always, Alex, how we doing this week?
Jeff, I'm just out here living. Livin. How are you doing this week?
I'm all right, I guess. All right. Be cooler if you did.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would.
So this week we are going to be talking about a weird one, Alex. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about, news and notes, anything like that, before we just hop right into this
No, let's
bad
just hop
boy?
right into this because
Okay.
this is an interesting little bugger.
Yeah, this is interesting that you said that because the band Squid came out with an album called Cowards, which we are not. Just want to get that out of the way right out the bat. So, Squid is a band that I hadn't heard of at all. Um, I saw, though, like associated artists, like people also liked, there were artists like Idols and Jordy Greep and artists like that. So I was immediately pretty intrigued about this one. And went from, you sent it over. You're like, this is a possibility an album we could do. I clicked on it. And I was like, okay, I like the album cover, which is very anxiety inducing. It's just a scorpion. You'll see them. Sure. I don't know if you could put up a little picture of it. Scorpion tail about to like pop into the tip of someone's finger. And it's like right at the point where it's about to go in there. And it's just, yeah, off-putting to say the very least. But once you get past that, the album completely backs up that feeling in every single way as you progress your way through it. So how did you find this one? Was this a band you knew about already or what?
Nominally, because this is an instance where I will cop to the use of AI the way I think it theoretically is meant to be used. Spotify now has like an AI playlist feature. And so I went in there and was like, I'm going to test this thing out. I'm always hungry for, so you find something like Jordy Greep and you're like, what's the next door that's going to open? What's associated with Jordy Greep that's going to make me leap through to finding someone else that like really trips my trigger like that? So I'm like, well, letting AI analyze that music and giving me similar artists, maybe that'll work. So I told one of the playlists, I was like, find me artists that are similar to Jordy Greep. Find me songs that are similar to Holy Holy. Find me albums that are similar to the New Sound. And just like tinkered with those parameters within the list. And, true to form with AI and Spotify, a lot of them were a big whiff. But one of them was Squid, and it was a song that is not on this album, not on Cowards. But I remember being like, okay, see, this has kind of the black MIDI flavor that I want. And all of that carried over into this album. Like, Idols, you hear a little Fontaine's DC, you hear black MIDI, Jordy Greep. You hear that kind of like weird art rock, alt rock, British scene, like the young punk art rock scene.
Can I give you a list of some of the bands that the producer of this Squid album has in common? With
Yes.
Squid. So, well, I guess that Squid will be in common with these other bands for using the same producer. So, bands like Fontaine's DC, bands like Wet Leg, bands like Black MIDI, and Grimes, and Slow Tie. So, Franz Ferdinand. I mean, I'm just scrolling down the list here, and it is like a murderer's row of basically most of the bands you were just mentioning. So it's funny, it's clear where that comes from. A producer can have a huge impact on kind of how an album sounds. But it's funny that those were all the bands you were mentioning, and it's very clear why you heard all of that in there.
Yeah, they like these acts have kind of coalesced around a sound. It is art rock. It's got a lot, and I love shit like that. It harkens to a lot of the dark wave stuff that I like, where it's not necessarily doing like sonic synth overload stuff, but it's the spirit of like the theatricality and the emphasis on concept, like abstract concepts, expressed very interestingly through this very uncomfortable music. I'm trying to think of someone else who's similar. Black
Tom
Country,
Waits.
Tom Waits, the very like conversational
Mm-hmm.
elements to it. Absolutely. There's this band that I've been getting into, Black Country New Road, who's got an album coming out in a couple months, I think, a new one. Totally weird because they've got like clarinets and shit in it, but
Mm-hmm.
it also is like art rock, and it has that. They've got a lot of the Tom Waits performative, like, and you will find kind of thing going on. And it's just it's an interesting listen because the first time through, you kind of like fight with it a little bit. You're like, oh, there are these kind of like discordant elements, and there's some like dissonance and repetitive stuff. And I'm like, yeah, do I like this? And then you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. Something like Fontaine's DC didn't grab me by the balls the first time, but Jordy Griep did because Jordy Griep was so outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
So you owe it to yourself. You know you're going to go back to something like the new sound, but you owe it to yourself to keep going through albums like this because every time a new element jumps out and sticks itself to
Mm-hmm.
you. And on an album like this, conceptually about the nature of evil itself, that's a very interesting idea, and I think captured like totally flawlessly here.
And I like that it's not like a good versus evil type of thing either. It is, I like that how you put it, it's like the nature of evil. And and it could be very simple. And it's just like ignoring somebody that needs a little bit of help that you could just like take 2 seconds and help them out, all the way to like, the most extreme evils you can think of. But it's like it's a very foreboding sound throughout this entire album. There was very much, it sounded like 8-bit Nintendo kind of synthesizer sounds at certain points in this, which were a little bit jarring, but I think it was very purposeful for them to be that way. I think a lot of the lyrical content, it's like you don't, when you're just, if you're like really actively listening to pick out every single word, you'll obviously, it's not that tough to do, but you're going to get the real sense of what some of these songs are about. Because a lot of them, if you just listen through to it, like it sounds, like this almost very proggy, almost a little bit jazzy sometimes, like this, similar way like Jordy Griep would. And it can be just a pleasant listen, or just something that you just have on, right? And but if you listen to these lyrics, you're just like, oh, this is dark. This is some very dark subject matter we're getting into here.
Oh, it's pitch black. It's wild. Like, so you go right off the top for the song Crispy Skin, which
Yeah.
is literally a song. It's inspired by the book Tender is the Flesh, which I have but have not read yet. Dystopian novel about an alternate future where cannibalism is normalized in society. So that's the song you're going to start this album about the nature of evil with. Crispy Skin, just like the image that immediately invokes. And then you have these lines like right at the end, we love their crispy skin because it's something that we crave. One hit right between the eyes. It's become so easy. It's become so easy to take a life.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about like a world where that's normalized to the point where you're eating motherfuckers. So they just like did all of this like really awesomely dark lyrical content done in a like fairly straightforward way, and the song like makes you work for that resolution. It drops in the crispy skin stuff, but otherwise keeps it pretty vague. Like the chorus is pretty minimal. Am I the bad one? Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I am. I mean, that's pretty straightforward, but it kind of works you into the end. And this idea of like, feels good to eat a motherfucker. And I don't see
Mm-hmm.
any problem with that behavior. It's just a wild song right off the top. And so I'm looking at talking the Wikipedia page here where they're talking about sort of their approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
Described as pet sounds, except all of the pets are scorpions and tarantulas, and maybe some stick insects too. And I think that is 100% apt of this kind of thing. It's creepy, it's uncomfortable. I find it kind of like super interesting and cool how unpleasant it is in a
Hmm.
lot of places, like how dark it is, but also like musically, it's very unpleasant a lot of times. It's very discordant,
Hmm.
but it works. It totally works.
It really feels like to me like this feels like a haunted house that from the outside doesn't look that bad. Because I think if you're not really like again like going into the real active listening of this, if you're just like have it on in the background, it's just on your headphones, but you're doing something else, not paying attention to it, it's like it's gonna sound fine, and pretty good actually. But if you really, the second you really start to like pay attention to what's going on in some of these songs, like right at the end of Crispy Skin, when they'd say the blood drips faster than you can think, like, and you think about that line, you're like, wait, what's that mean? And then you realize you've been talking about cannibals here, right? And now it's like, okay, so the blood is dripping, and they're what it meant to me was like they can't think fast enough to stop themselves from being like attracted to that and wanting that and craving that. It's like, well, you can hold off for a little while, but eventually, like, it's going to catch up to you. Like, the blood drips faster than you can think. And I was just like kind of floored by that because I was like, that is so dark. But just the fact that you have to kind of parse that out after this like 6 minute, usually an intro to an album is like some little like 1 minute thing. Maybe they're going to do it bleeds into the music of the first song, or the actual second track of the album. But this one just like what 6 minutes and change or something like that right off the bat
Yeah.
for this, and you just know that you're on your way to a journey. And I think one of my favorite songs when I hit Blood on the Boulders, I was
Yes, dude.
hooked like the first hit that hit the way that it was supposed to,
Absolutely.
like just unbelievable. That chorus, that California sun on my face, all those drugs, they fogged her brain. Like it's so haunting. It sounds like the Beach Boys, but if they had done like meth and coke instead of a lot of LSD and heroin.
Which I think is totally appropriate because a Beach Boy ties into the narrative of the song. The song is based on the Manson murders. Wilson
Mm.
had a tenuous connection to the Mansons, because it was he and Terry, not Terry Gordy, that's a wrestler, Terry Melcher, I think. I'm fucking up the last name, but he was a producer. Um, and a lot of people don't know this, but Charlie Manson was actually a pretty decent songwriter.
Hmm.
And I've heard some very like rough demos that are pretty interesting. And there's a Beach Boys song that sounds an awful lot like one of Charlie Manson's songs. Um, and he was just kind of like on the periphery of this little group that included Dennis Wilson. So maybe it's appropriate to use a little bit of that Beach Boys influence to do
Hmm.
a song about the Manson murders. Done in such a creepy way, and like the tone set from the beginning. All the houses in this country are built like shit. Drywall, well, I could put my fist through it if I wanted to.
Yeah,
Perfect image.
like paint a picture, man.
Starts
That
off
was
with
so
that
good.
anger, then into that California sun on my face, and like how structurally heavy this is and repetitive. All the we want to know, we return to the scene, blood on the boulders, just like all the repetition just hammering you in this. These songs on this album just kind of grab you and don't let you go. And it's, we just recorded our episode about Twigs, which will have come out, in the past as of this
Mhm.
episode hearing. Um, but in talking about that, and I'm talking about like the way electronic music has a tendency to do that, you hit a point of diminishing returns. But on something like this, that repetition, that dirge like quality to it in a lot of ways, something Lingua Ignota does really well, where it's chants, it's repetitive, but it's got like a like horrific Gregorian chant element to it. Um, that repetition is very powerful when you do it with the right thing. Like
Mhm.
Paramore, there's a song, I forget the name of it. It might be All I Wanted Was You, but it's basically the big like hooky part is pretty basic, and it's designed to just let Haley Williams swing for the fences and
Oh, I
showcase
know
the
exactly what you're talking about, and that
yeah.
is such a good part of that song.
All
Yeah.
I wanted was you.
Yeah. Great
And
song.
like, that repetition, I keep saying reputation almost. That repetition is there to service that one trick. But I think on this album, it does become like, if you're gonna meditate on evil, you can meditate on like ritualistic evil,
Mhm.
like highly organized evil. And so it becomes more structured and more chant like and darker and weirder and more interesting, like song to song to song. And yeah, Blood on the Boulders was like a big entry point for me. I liked what I heard up to that. And then we got to that song and I was like, yeah, all right. Okay.
Yeah, that one, that was the one. I mean, the first song I was like, "What the hell is this?" Like the first song, I was intrigued. Second song was good, and I was like, "Okay, all right, we're getting in this." I was already getting that kind of little bit of the Jordy Griep vibe, and then Blood on the Boulders hit, and I was like, "Jesus Christ!" Like, is this another Griep? You know, and that's in it. I don't think it ended up being quite that level, but I don't know. Moving right along to some other songs, like so, Fieldworks 1 and 2, they were good in the album. I feel like though, if you're gonna like pick things out to talk about, I didn't find a ton in those because I think Fieldworks 1 especially had a very repetitive sort of vibe for me. It almost felt almost very interlude almost on the album.
Yeah, I those functioned really well as good little interlude tidbits. I like when albums do that kind of thing. And it serves to really highlight like the weird stuff that they're doing on like Cro-Magnon Man.
Mm-hmm.
That was another one that really stood out to me. It's very sad. It's very kind of like pathetic and worn out. Um, there's a lot of like allusions to repression on it, and it's got like a different kind of evil. I don't want to necessarily like peg every song down to like it has to take a certain POV on evil
Mm-hmm.
because that's what the album's about. But it's like a different it's like malaise, uncertainty, um just sad and brutal, but also musically incredibly interesting and incredibly
Mm-hmm.
quirky, like quirkier than a song like that has any right to be. Um, yeah, and that's just the trick on an album like this is doing those quirky things without being quite as tastefully outrageous as Jordy Griep
Mm-hmm.
or balls out outrageous as a completely unrelated group, but that Electric Callboys group.
Yeah.
Or is it Eskimo Callboys? There's a whole controversy around my reaction video that I did for it where I'm like, wait a minute, the video says Eskimo Cowboys. I Googled Electric Cowboys and this is what it gave me.
It's
So who's crazy?
it's Electric Callboy is the name.
Electric Callboys. Okay.
Yeah. We'll see what you reacted to. I guess we'll find out.
Something with some pumpkin pie haircutted freaks. And the song was wonderful, but it was so decadent and over the top that it does become kind of funny and gimmicky, like Victor's lead.
Yes. Yes.
But this album, it threads that needle so carefully,
Mm-hmm.
where it's quirky as fuck without being super corny and obvious and lame.
This felt like gave me almost same kind of vibes as like Lingua Ignota. You know, just
Very much so, in parts.
there's just something very demonic feeling about a lot of these songs, like Cowards, when he's it's just seems it's so haunting when they're like, we put the pellets down and we walk around the town. Don't ever say you're bored because there's always something more. You know, and when you were talking about the lines feeling like there was some repression and stuff like that maybe a different kind of repression, but still very, very much felt like that. Where, you know, it's just like they talk about being in a castle and maybe you kind of get this sense maybe they're talking about being in an actual castle, but then it's like, no, it's just a kind of an illusion of grandeur. They're in a rundown house, you know, and I think to me, the way they set the scenery, you know, and talking about plastic bags never go away, the way they set this scenery, it just like you want to try to find some happiness there, some reason to be optimistic, and they're just not giving you a damn thing. They're like, nope, you're going to be sad and you like it, and you're only halfway done with this album.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
not going to make this easy.
Yeah.
But what we are going to give you is a lot of stuff that's interesting musically to chomp on, even when it's like very dark, the kind of heavier, more dark wave kind of things that just kind of like wash over you like this mortal coil, it'll end in tears. Just some of the most depressing shit ever. It never like wallows. It's never like, it doesn't really have like a condemning point of view. It has a lot of understand, like a desire to understand the nature of evil. It's not prescriptive. It's also